know the word prehistoric was not even in the dictionary until about 100 years ago? See, there are things that are pre-flood, but there's no such thing as prehistoric. We have history from the first day. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. You can't go before that. They don't want to admit God created the world because that would mean He owns it. They don't want to admit there was a flood because, that proves God has the authority to judge His creation. They don't like that idea. And they sure don't want to admit there's a coming judgment. Sadly, many Christians are also ignorant of what that original creation was like and what that flood did to this world. And so because of their ignorance of the creation and the flood, it causes Christians to compromise the clear teaching of God's Word. In 1795, a book was written that said the earth is millions of years old, and Christians, some of them believed it and said, wow, we've got to make the Bible say that. And so they scrambled with compromised positions.
How old is the Earth? Evolutionists claim it's 4.6 billion years old. But what does the evidence say? Let's take a look.
The textbooks in our schools are filled with the idea of millions and billions of years. The next time you hear someone say millions and millions of years ago, stop them and ask, were you there? Science is knowledge derived from observation and study. Can you observe, study, or demonstrate something that happened billions of years ago? Absolutely not. It is true that over half the scientists believe in evolution. That is true, but that does not make evolution true. Just because a bunch of scientists believe something does not make it true. They have a long history of being wrong. They used to teach that a big rock will fall faster than a little rock. They were wrong. They used to teach that if you were sick you had bad blood. This was known as the doctrine of humors. It was believed that if you bled out the bad blood you would get better. There used to be places all over the United States where you could go and get your blood taken out. You knew where they were because out front they had a white pole with a red stripe around it. The barber was the bloodletter. And right beside George Washington, when they were bleeding him to death, was a Bible that told them, for the life of the flesh is in the blood. In 2011, the world's population reached 7 billion people. In 1985, there were 5 billion people on planet Earth. And in 1800, there were only 1 billion people on the planet. Most people agree that there were only about 1 billion people around 1800. The world's population at the time of Christ was about 250 million people. Starting from the Bible, we see that 6,000 years ago, God created everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a worldwide flood in which only 8 people survived. And this is exactly what the evidence shows. The current population shows only 4,400 years of growth. Let's talk about supernova rings. When a star blows up, it creates a nova or a supernova. Astronomers have observed that about every 30 years a star dies and explodes into a supernova. There are only about 300 supernovas. Let's see, 300 times 30 equals about 9,000 years. Well, if the universe is billions of years old, how come there are less than 300 supernovas? There should be several hundred million of them. This is evidence that shows that the universe is only thousands of years old, not billions. Jupiter is cooling off and therefore cannot be billions of years old. If it were billions of years old, it would have cooled off by now. Here we have the moon. The moon goes around the earth. I think we can all agree about this. As the moon goes around the earth, it is gradually getting farther away. We are slowly losing the moon. It's leaving us a couple of inches per year. Not a big deal. But if the moon is getting farther and farther away every day, that means that it used to be closer. Well, if we bring the moon in closer, we start to create a problem because the moon is what causes the tides. If the moon were closer, the tides would be higher. There's a law called the inverse square law. If you brought the moon to 1/3 the distance, you flip the 1/3 and square it, you get 9 times the gravitational pull. If you were to do all the math on this, you will find out that the moon and the earth would have been almost together just over 1 billion years ago. Walt Brown, in his book In the Beginning, says that this fact alone puts the age of the Earth-Moon system at less than 1.2 billion years max. Short period comets are losing material and have a life expectancy of less than 10,000 years. If the universe is billions of years old, why do we still see comets? They should all be gone by now. Magnets lose their strength with time. The Earth's magnetic strength has declined 10% in the last 150 years and 40% in the last 1,000 years. Since it is getting weaker, that means that it used to be stronger, and it cannot be more than 25,000 years old. The Earth's magnetic field alone limits the Earth to being less than 25,000 years old. This also means that carbon dating cannot work for more than a few thousand years. The Sahara Desert has a prevailing wind pattern. The wind almost always blows the same direction. This causes the desert to grow. The process is called desertification. They did an in-depth study of the Sahara Desert and came to the conclusion that the Sahara Desert is probably about 4,000 years old. So the desert started growing about 4,000 years ago. If the Earth is millions of years old, why is there not a bigger desert somewhere? Why would the biggest desert on the planet be less than 4,000 years old? Well, let's start from the Bible and see if we can figure this thing out. The Bible says that 6,000 years ago, God created everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a worldwide flood. It's pretty hard to have a desert under a worldwide flood. So I predict that the oldest desert should be less than 4,400 years old. And it is. Sometimes when they drill into the ground, they hit oil. And these oil wells can have up to 20,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. That is a lot of pressure. 20,000 psi. The people that have studied this have concluded that the rock can only hold that pressure for about 10,000 years or less. They say it should have cracked the rock and leaked off in less than 10,000 years. So now I have two questions. Where did the oil come from, and why is it still under pressure? Most scientists agree that oil comes from organisms that are changed by heat and pressure, turning them into oil. And it does not take millions of years to make oil. In 1971, they learned how to make oil in 20 minutes in the laboratory. In 1996, a proposal was approved in Western Australia that would build a plant to create oil from sewage sludge in just 30 minutes. There's a place in Texas that has turned turkey guts and other waste into oil. They said, we duplicated what Mother Nature does, but what Mother Nature took millions of years to do, we do in about 30 minutes. Again, let's start with the Bible and see what really happened. 6,000 years ago, God created everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a worldwide flood. During that flood, lots of animals and people drowned. They got buried by the gravel, rocks, and mud and sand, which got pretty heavy after a while, and eventually they were squished into oil. So the oil that is down there today is from the people and animals that drowned and got buried in the flood of Noah's day. Wood petrifies quickly. Here's some petrified firewood. Here's a petrified fish giving birth. It does not take millions of years to give birth. Here's a petrified cowboy boot with the cowboy's legs still in it. Here is a picture of the oldest tree on the planet. It is called the bristlecone pine. Now, tree ring dating is not an exact science. Trees often produce more than one ring each year. But this textbook says the oldest tree in the world is 4,300 years old. Now that is a pretty old tree. However, I have a question. If the Earth is billions of years old, why don't we have an older tree someplace? Why is the oldest tree 4,300 years old? The largest coral reef in the world is off the coast of Australia and is called the Great Barrier Reef. Some of the reef was destroyed during World War II by warships and things like that. Afterwards, some environmentalists studied the reef to see how fast it grows back. They watched it grow for 20 years. After watching it grow for 20 years, they came to the conclusion that the reef is less than 4,200 years old. If the Earth is billions of years old, why don't we have a bigger reef someplace? And why is the oldest coral reef less than 4,200 years old? When it rains, 30% of the water runs into the ocean, bringing with it mineral salts. The oceans are getting saltier every day. Today, they are 3.6% salt. They could have gone from fresh water to 3.6% salt in less than 5,000 years. If the Earth were millions or billions of years old, the oceans would be much more saltier. If you have ever been in a cave, the guide always says, don't touch the formations because they take millions of years to form. They say this formation in New Mexico started 250 million years ago. I don't think so. Some say that the fastest they can grow are 2.5 inches per 1,000 years. Here are some 50-inch stalactites growing under the Lincoln Memorial that was built in 1922. The photo was taken in the 1960s, so this happened in only about 40 years. Here's a picture of a guy in a building in Indiana that has huge cave formations in the basement from where the water had been leaking through the limestone. The picture was taken only 40 years after the building was built. Here's a picture from a mine in Australia. The mine was closed for 55 years, and when they went back in, there were these huge cave formations inside that only took 55 years to form. Did you know that at the current rate of erosion, the continents would erode flat in 14 million years? Obviously, the continents have not eroded flat, so the Earth cannot be millions of years old. Erosion features all over the Earth show there was much greater erosion in the past, probably from Noah's flood. The whole world was destroyed by Noah's flood. Here we have the Grand Canyon. This textbook says over millions of years, the Colorado River has carved out the Grand Canyon from solid rock. This textbook says the Colorado River has cut through layer upon layer of rock over millions of years. I don't think so. If a dam were built across Grand Canyon, a large lake would form. In fact, right after the flood of Noah's day, there used to be two huge lakes there, Grand Lake and Hopi Lake. The lakes are long gone, but the beaches are still there. You can still see the beach line. They got too full, went over the top, and washed out that canyon relatively quickly. That canyon is a washed out spillway. So no, it did not take millions of years for the Grand Canyon to form. It formed quickly, just after the flood.
Trace that backwards, it all started 4,400 years ago, right when the Bible says the flood occurred. Why? Because the earth is young, not old.
Is the fossil record really stacked in a way that proves life evolved on Earth over millions of unseen years? Or does the fossil record provide evidence that the world was covered by a massive flood in Noah's time just thousands of years ago? Actually, the fossil record does not show increasingly complex life emerging over the millennia. What it shows is a record of death in the order that the creatures were buried during the worldwide flood. Think about it for a minute. Genesis 7 verse 11 says that the fountains of the great deep were broken up and the windows of heaven were open, creating floods and tidal waves that were unimaginable. The Bible says the floodwaters increased upon the earth for 150 days until all the high hills under heaven were covered with over 20 feet of water. This process successively buried all creatures outside the ark based on where they lived as the floodwaters prevailed, how smart they were, their means and speed of mobility, and their body density. This is precisely why the fossil record generally shows the shallow water marine creatures buried in the lower layers. Then, as the ocean waters rose higher and higher, the suffocated fish were buried, followed by amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and then birds. Dr. Carl Warner spent 17 years traveling to museums and dig sites around the globe, photographing thousands of original fossils and the actual fossil layers where they were found. His research revealed a lack of evidence for evolution theory, including no transitional fossils and clear evidence that shows animals have remained the same over the supposed millions of years of evolution.
Dinosaur means terrible lizard, and dinosaurs lived with humans all through history. They just had a different name for them. But dinosaur bones and human bones have been found together. Dinosaur bones were found in the same rock strata as these fossilized human hands. Dinosaur bones and mammal bones found together. Here's one of the Ica stones showing a human riding a dinosaur. Dr. Ball has a couple of the stones in his museum. We have 8 in our museum now of these Ica stones. I think we have the largest collection in America of these Ica stones from Peru. Many of them show dinosaurs on there. Dinosaur footprints and human footprints have been found together. Go to Dallas, Texas, and go south 45 miles to Glen Rose, and you'll find the Paluxy River flows through this little town, and it's all full of limestone. The whole area is limestone, kind of like around here in Knoxville. Well, that river cuts through this limestone layers. In 1908, there was a flood. The river dropped 17 feet per mile, but this flood was incredible. It was, I think, 30 feet above flood stage or something. It was just an incredible flood in 1908. It ripped off the bottom of the river, tore off the layer of limestone. 2 foot of limestone was ripped up. Underneath was a new layer of limestone, and when the river dried up that next summer, they discovered there are hundreds of dinosaur footprints. Dinosaur footprints. It's called Dinosaur Valley State Park. They chiseled out lots of the footprints and took them to museums to save them so they wouldn't get eroded by the river. Took out huge blocks in the 1930s and set them up under dinosaur skeletons. Footprints are big. Here's a little kid taking a bath in one. But sometimes in this area they find human footprints with the dinosaur footprints. Human tracks and dinosaur tracks together. Here's a trail of human tracks and crossing a trail of dinosaur tracks. And the human footprints, some of them are pretty good size, and occasionally they're found inside the dinosaur footprint. Well, if you're running through the mud to escape the flood, that's the logical place to step, right where somebody else already stepped. Just like walking through deep snow. And I think a lot of people get the wrong idea. They think Noah got in the ark, the rain started, and everybody died in the first 10 minutes. It probably took 6 months to kill everybody on this planet. They'd be running, looking for high ground. The water kept coming up. See, the rain was 40 days, but the Bible says the water kept coming up for 150 days. Because most of the water is coming from inside the crust of the earth, up through the fountains of the deep. A friend of mine was down there when they were digging out the footprints. He wrote me this letter. He's now an assistant pastor at a Southern Baptist church in Arizona. He said, Dr. Hovind, I grew up in Glen Rose. I was on an excavation with Dr. Carl Ball. We followed the footprints of a man beside a dinosaur's footprints. It was as if the man were walking with the dinosaur. Nova was there to film the dig. There was also an evolutionist who was arguing with Dr. Ball the entire time. Nova didn't film much of the tracks or our dig, but they did interview the evolutionist. He told them he had not seen anything there to disprove evolution. What he didn't tell the camera was he had refused to turn around and look at the tracks we were working on. When they found one, they would tap him on the shoulder and say, sir, you want to look at this? He'd say, no, I don't want to see it. He stood with his back to the dig and the tracks while making these statements. Nova knew the man had not looked at the tracks, but they didn't report that. See, Nova apparently is committed to a theory called evolution, and anything that goes against the theory is just simply not going to be aired on TV, period. The theory has to be protected from criticism. Also, they found a hammer, a fossilized human hammer, a man-made hammer. People say they didn't have any iron before the flood. Oh, sure they did. The Bible says Tubal-Cain was an artificer in brass and iron. This bell found inside a lump of coal. They knew about iron and metals before the flood came. They were extremely smart. You kids will be taught in school that the geologic column represents the history of the earth and that the Carboniferous era is when coal formed. That's baloney. Coal formed at the time of the flood because that world was buried. They found a gold chain inside a lump of coal back in 1881 in Illinois. This iron pot found inside a lump of coal. This thing found inside solid rock, supposed to be 600 million years old. Here I am in Nampa, Idaho, holding what's called the Nampa image. A well driller found this little doll 320 feet down while he's drilling a well, probably a pre-flood doll. Advanced stone tools were found in a gold mine in California. They're digging in the middle of this mountain, digging a shaft back into a gravel pit under layers of lava supposed to be 55 million years old, and they find human tools in there. Professor Holmes of the Smithsonian was one of the most vocal critics of the California finds. He said, perhaps if Professor Whitney had fully appreciated the story of human evolution as it is understood today, he would have hesitated to announce the conclusions, notwithstanding the imposing array of testimony. Is he saying he shouldn't have announced this finding because it goes against the theory? Is that what he's saying? That's exactly what he's saying. And folks, I'm telling you, there are people that are so dedicated to that stupid evolution theory that they will block out from their mind and from print, if they can, anything that goes against it. They defend the theory with religious fervor. Smithsonian is very responsible for doing a lot of this stuff of hiding evidence against evolution.
What happened next happened by mistake. Mary put some fragments of the bone in acid to dissolve away the outermost layer of mineral. But the acid worked too fast, and all the mineral dissolved away. Being a fossil, there should have been nothing left. But there was, and it was elastic, like living tissue.
This is the piece.
No. She showed us video she took under the microscope.
That's really what happened?
Yes.
That's the dinosaur bone?
Without mineral now. That's what was left.
It looked like the soft tissue she would have expected to find if it had been modern bone. This was impossible. This bone was 68 million years old.
So you see this and you think, what? You say,
I didn't want to tell anybody.
You'd be ridiculed,
yes.
Right?
And so I said to my technician, okay, do it again. I don't believe it.
And yet, in sample after sample, they were there. Things that looked suspiciously like flexible, transparent blood vessels. She finally mustered the courage to tell Jack.
She said she dissolved the bone away and there were blood vessels. And, I was like shocked. I mean,
how could that be?
How could that be? That's right.
The things Mary was finding inside dinosaur bones,
look at that,
blood vessels, and even what seemed to be intact cells, pose a radical challenge to the existing rules of science. That organic material can't possibly survive even 1 million years, let alone 68 million. These are pieces of an even older dinosaur, a well-preserved 80-million-year-old duckbill. When she dissolved it away in acid,
Let's put this under the scope here.
Well, look.
Is that a blood vessel?
This is a blood vessel.
You're
You
kidding.
see the branches right there? And look at all of them. And it's so consistent over and over and over again. We do this bone and it comes out and I get excited every time.
Nearly every textbook in Science magazine teaches that the Earth is billions of years old, and the primary dating method used for determining this is what is called radioisotope dating, or radiometric dating. Now, this is a reliable method for measuring absolute ages of rocks and the age of the Earth, right? Huh.
Evolutionists claim that they have absolute proof of millions of years by resorting to radiometric dating. The trouble is, it's not reliable. They find carbon-14 in diamonds and dinosaur fossils that are supposed to be millions of years old. The problem is, carbon-14 only exists for about 50,000 years. How can it still be present in finds that are millions of years old?
When he looked out at distant galaxies, he discovered that they were an average moving away from us, and those that were twice as fast were moving twice as far away from us, those that are 3 times as far away, 3 times as fast, etc. Now, whenever I present this, and anyone else has presented it, the natural assumption is, when you look at this, that we are the center of the universe, because it implies that everything's moving away from us, and we are the center. And that, of course, is not true.
So is everything we know wrong?
Well, if the Copernican principle is wrong, then yes. Because as Bob said, everything is interpreted through that epistemological grid. And if that foundational assumption is wrong, then yes, our picture of the universe is fundamentally wrong. Now, the scientists will argue back and forth about this. They are very invested in a very successful model. But that model has a lot of patches in it. Dark matter, dark energy, these things have not been observationally confirmed. They believe they must be there because their formulas have gotten them so far, and so they'll plug in these other entities to make the equations work. But there is a strong and growing, very credible group of scientists who are beginning to question the Copernican principle. For example, we all learned about dark energy. Dark energy is causing the universe to accelerate its expansion. Well, George Ellis and a group that he works with, that we talk about in the film with, they said, wait a minute, let's just play with this for a second. Let's look at the world through a different view. Let's put Earth near the center, and let's get rid of the Copernican principle. Can we explain everything we see without dark energy? And the answer is yes, you can. And you will see many papers now in the peer-reviewed journals. They call it void cosmology. And the idea is that we're at the center of a void. And if we assume that the Earth is in that special non-Copernican position, we don't need dark energy to explain these observations. And that's big. That's big, because nobody has a clue what dark energy is.
Well, that's one of the things, Bob, isn't it? That it seems to me that, okay, so there's a big riddle here that, at least from the purely scientific point of view, there's this big riddle, and the riddle is, how does the universe work? Okay, at some point, you throw out a guess about some aspect of it, and then to support that guess, you have to come up with 3 more guesses. And to support those 3, they each spin off 10 more. Well, at what point do you get called on the fact, hey guys, every time you come up with one of these further guesses, you're further removed from anything observable?
Here's another objection. If everything is moving, in other words, all the stars in the universe are moving, how could we possibly determine if we are the center of this moving universe?
Over the past decade or so, we have seen out to the very limits of the observable cosmos. We've mapped its largest structure, the cosmic microwave background, the oldest light in the universe according to the standard Big Bang model of cosmology. What we have discovered is shocking.
On the very largest scales, we see a pattern of really big hot and cold spots which line up around a special axis, which has been dubbed the axis of evil. And it's quite puzzling. Why is there a special direction in space?
Well, you know, it's interesting that you asked that, because in 2009 they set up a probe called the Planck probe. It just came back with the results in 2013 in March. I don't know if you heard about it or not.
No.
The European Space Agency set it up in cooperation with NASA. This was the third attempt that they had to nullify the data that they were finding in the cosmic microwave background radiation that permeates the whole universe, that the Earth was in the center of the universe. The first one they set up was in 1990 called the COBE probe. It came back, showed the Earth was in the center. The WMAP was the second one in 2001, came back with the same data. And what they tried to do was say that this was all an error. It was some kind of misreading, or it was there was contamination in the apparatus or the sky or whatever. So they sent up a third probe in 2009, just came back in 2013. Guess what? Same exact results. Same exact results. And what were the interpretations? Well, the Earth has to be in the center of the universe. And we have somebody quoted in our book, Lawrence Krauss of the Arizona State University, who says, yeah, this means we're in the center of the universe.
Let's pick up on that point a bit. You mentioned that the background radiation, microwave radiation in the universe, supplied data from which it became apparent that the Earth was in fact at the center of a moving universe. Explain why that is so. Why do these data confirm that?
Okay. Well, the Big Bang Theory predicts that there was an explosion 13.7 billion years ago. Okay? So if there was an explosion, then that means the explosion had to come out equal on all sides of the sphere. It had to be what they call homogeneous. Okay? And that's naturally accepted. It's like homogenized milk.
Sure.
You know, you shake that thing up and you can't see one place from another place. It's all homogenized. And that's what they needed for this Big Bang universe. What they found when they sent these three probes up, yeah, some of it was homogeneous, but it's like having a bowl full of Jell-O with two swords going through the middle of the Jell-O.
What are the swords?
The swords are the orientation of the cosmic microwave background radiation throughout the universe.
What do you mean by the orientation?
Okay, there's hot and cold spots they found. It's not homogeneous. There's hot and cold spots in this microwave background radiation, and if you align all these cold spots, it forms an X through the whole universe.
Unbelievable.
And guess what's in the middle?
Oh, you're kidding.
No.
This is what the data shows.
This is what the data shows.
Okay, come on now. What mainstream publication recognizes
the
this?
University of Michigan, Dragon Hutterer, Craig Copey, Glenn Starkman. These are all the guys who have done all the work on this microwave radiation. They write it in their papers. They wrote one in 2004, 2008, 2010, and 2012, and they're writing another one on the Planck probe.
So you're saying these space probes were designed to explain away the X represented by the hot and cold spots?
They wanted to make sure it wasn't an accident.
Okay, so there were how many probes in total?
3 in 20 years.
And you're saying that all 3 confirmed what then?
That the Earth is in the center of the universe.
On the basis of the hot and cold spots?
Yes.
Whose alignment represents an X.
An X.
And at the center of the X is the Earth.
Right, and they call that X the axis of evil. That was coined.
Scientists call that the axis of evil.
Called it the axis of evil.
So, in other words, they're enraged by the finding.
Oh, yeah.
Because it upsets their worldview, which has to displace the Earth's special position in the universe.
Yeah.
Which fits in rather nicely with a divinely created universe.
Right.
Made for man.
All of cosmology is based on what we call the Copernican principle. Every piece of data that they get in their telescope has to be filtered through the Copernican principle. And that's what the Big Bang Theory does, NASA does it, ESA does it, everybody does it. The upsetting thing about this microwave radiation is it just totally defies the Copernican principle.